Hi guys, welcome to the channel. So today I'm going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G9 Plus and the Poco X3 Pro. Now both of these phones are really well spec'd for the price that you're paying, and depending on where you look, these are both sub £200 smartphones. So I'm just going to compare the specs of each phone and see which one might be better for you if you're looking for a new phone. Okay, so if we're looking at both of these phones from the front, as you can see, they're both very large phones. So we'll start with the Motorola G9 Plus on the left. Up front we have a 6.8 inch Full HD Plus IPS LCD display. This has a resolution of 2400 by 1080, which is good for 386 pixels per inch. So despite it being a very large display, even by today's standards, it's still very sharp and you can't see any individual pixels even when looking up close. Unfortunately, there's no high refresh rate here, which is becoming more common even in budget and mid-range phones, so that is a bit unfortunate. Up in the top left hand corner of the display, there's a 16 megapixel f2.0 selfie camera which can record up to 1080p video at 30 frames per second. So if we move on to the Poco X3 Pro, you have a 6.67 inch display, which is also an LCD display, but the X3 Pro has the advantage of having a 120Hz high refresh rate display. Now, I understand that not necessarily everybody watching these videos is going to understand some of the features that I point out in this video and in this comparison, so I'll briefly explain some of them here. So most older phones and still some newer models, namely the iPhone 12 and before that, all come with a 60Hz refresh rate display. And basically what this means is that the display refreshes the content that you're seeing 60 times per second. A 90Hz display 90 times per second, and a 120Hz display 120 times per second. So this means there's a lower latency on the display as the screen content is being refreshed a lot faster. So this does help make the user experience a lot smoother. However, a downside to this is it does take more of a toll on battery life. So thankfully most phones have either large batteries, and there's also the option to turn the high refresh rate display off or set it to auto so that it can automatically switch between high refresh rate when it thinks it needs to. The X3 Pro also has Corning Gorilla Glass 6 protection, whereas there's no information on the glass used on the G9 Plus, which I've still found it to be pretty durable, and it does not come with a pre-applied screen protector as well, which the X3 Pro does. So the fact that it's scratch free still is decent. And lastly, up in the top center this time, there's a 20 megapixel f2.2 selfie camera which also shoots 1080p video at 30 frames per second. So aside from the difference in refresh rate between these phones, both displays are very high quality, sharp, and display nice colours, so you won't be disappointed with either. If we flip both phones over to talk more about the materials used, the G9 Plus has a unibody plastic back which curves around the sides in one piece, and also has quite a glossy feel to it. I don't know if you could see, but there are a few fingerprints on there which it is prone to collecting. The plastic back on the X3 Pro is also glossy, but it has this two-tone design with the Poco branding right there in the middle. The X3 Pro, although, has aluminium frame as opposed to either a plastic frame or a plastic unibody design. If we look at the bottom of the phones, both phones have a USB-C port which supports fast charging, a speaker grill and a microphone. Both phones have a 3.5mm headphone jack. The only difference though is the placement. The X3 Pro has it on the bottom, but the G9 Plus, it is situated at the top. Also up top, the X3 Pro has an extra speaker, so there's stereo speaker support, which the G9 lacks, even over the older G8 Plus, which did have stereo speakers. In terms of the battery, both phones have very large batteries, a 5000 milliamp hour on the G9 Plus and a slightly larger 5160 milliamp hour on the X3 Pro. So both should deliver excellent battery life. The chances of noticing a difference between the two battery sizes is unlikely, especially if you're going to be using the 120Hz refresh rate on the X3 Pro. As for storage and RAM, the G9 Plus has 4GB of RAM and the X3 Pro has 6GB. There are more configurations available, but I'll just be talking of the models that I have here. Both of these have 128GB of expandable storage. The only difference here is the G9 Plus has UFS 2.1 storage, whereas the X3 Pro has faster UFS 3.1 storage. Again, for those of you unsure on what this means, a phone with a higher UFS storage means higher read and write speeds, so copying files on and off your phones will be a lot faster, among other things. As for processing power, this is where the X3 Pro takes quite a substantial leap over the G9 Plus. The G9 Plus uses a Snapdragon 730G processor, which, don't get me wrong, is still a very capable processor, capable of handling everyday tasks, stutter-free, and even moderate gaming as well. The X3 Pro uses the new Snapdragon 860 chip, which is essentially a Snapdragon 855 Plus on steroids. It's just a slightly tweaked version of that chip. So much better and more powerful processor. And for those that are interested, here are the Geekbench 5 results, which you can clearly see the 860 is considerably more powerful, especially on the multi-core test. But to be honest, again, same with the display, you won't be disappointed with the performance of either phone. And last but not least, I want to briefly talk about the camera systems on both of these phones. Both phones offer quad lens setups with a main lens 64 megapixels on the G9 Plus and 48 megapixels on the X3 Pro. They also have 8 megapixel ultra wide cameras and a pair of 2 megapixel depth and macro lenses, which I'm not even going to bother talking about, to be honest. Both cameras are very capable in good light capturing nice sharp photos with good colour and detail. Like most phone cameras these days, both phones use pixel binning technology to produce higher quality but lower resolution photos. I found that the G9 Plus has performed better in this comparison, offering sharper and more detailed photos, which is especially noticeable when cropping in, although considering it's a 64 binned at 16 megapixel camera compared to the 48 bin at 12 megapixel camera of the X3 Pro, it's not surprising. Both ultra-wide cameras, again, in good light capture respectable photos with some shift in colour temperature, and because of the lower resolution are much softer with less detail. And then briefly onto video, both phones can capture up to 4K video at 30 frames per second for nice high resolution video. I've done a more in-depth camera review on both of these phones, so be sure to check them out on my channel. And while I'm on the topic, if you're enjoying this video, a thumbs up and a subscribe to my channel would be awesome. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is my comparison between the Poco X3 Pro and the Motorola G9 Plus. These two phones are two of my favourite that I've had the pleasure of using and reviewing. They're both available currently on Amazon for £199 for their base configurations, so you're not going to be disappointed with either. Out of the two, I would personally, if it was me, I would probably pick the X3 Pro, simply because of the boost in RAM, the faster storage, the high refresh rate display, and the more powerful processor. On the flip side, with the Moto G9 Plus, if you do like a screen that's a little bit bigger, you have obviously got that. You've also got a near stock Android experience, which Motorola phones are more known for, and you're not going to be disappointed with the 730G processor inside unless you're a really hardcore gamer, which then you might struggle. Going back to the user experience, the Poco X3 Pro uses MIUI for Poco, so it's one of the skins that are available on an Android phone that isn't for everybody, but of course you have the option of downloading more launchers to put on top of here if Poco skin isn't for you. So that's my comparison. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this is helpful. I've tried to do it aimed towards the average consumer, but also towards someone that's a bit more tech savvy. I've chucked a few more technical terms in there. I am working on a tech jargon explained video, which will just be a quick video going through some of the terms in the smartphone world to just help people to understand it a bit better. So again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.